Elden Ring has been in these gaming streets. It is critically acclaimed. Almost every content creator I know loves this game, and it's reviewing extremely well. But I'm really looking at Elden Ring and I see something that I really feel like FromSoftware has done a very good job with that I feel like the rest of the gaming industry can really learn from. But before we get on with the video, definitely hit that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. You can always subscribe to the channel for weekly content. And don't forget to go over there and follow me at Twitter at Lord Addict IOP. Without any further ado, let's talk about Elden Ring. What's going on, you guys? Gaming Addict here, coming at you for another video. I want to talk about Elden Ring today, and what I really want to talk about Elden Ring is exactly what's going on in the industry. Now, first off, let's talk about the game itself. I do have it. I have been playing it. I've been streaming it on my Twitch channel, so, you know, shameless plug, definitely go down there and go to the Iron Lords Podcast Twitch if you want to see me stream this game. And the thing I want to really point out is that this game shows that FromSoftware has learned from their past mistakes, from previous games that they've made over and over again, and they've able to craft this type of game. Elden Ring is not a masterpiece, but you know what Elden Ring shows? That you can continuously do something without changing it drastically. You can make something great without changing the formula and what the foundation will stand on. Let's look at the example of something like Final Fantasy and Square. I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, and I've personally felt like Final Fantasy has been a shell of itself for a long time now. Now, I know there's a lot of people that like the new formula and the new direction that Final Fantasy went to, but for me, I came from those original Final Fantasies. I've never really liked the way they went. I felt like 12 was the last one that I really enjoyed, but I do feel like even that was too much of a step out of my comfort zone in terms of how the Final Fantasy franchises were dealt up till that point. 10 was the last amazing game they made. Now, I'm not going to say that Final Fantasy is completely horrible now. I do feel like they get some things right and some things wrong, but back then they were making gold after gold after gold, and I felt like ever since 13 they've went to this giant downward spiral that it feels weird. And the reason I feel like they've done that is because they don't even themselves know what they want to do with the brand, and they keep trying to chase this casual bag to get as many people into the brand as possible, that I feel like that's one of the reasons that they are in the state they're in. Now, if you look at something like FromSoftware, they had Demon Souls. They worked that up to Dark Souls. They worked that up to Sekiro. And what I want to point out here, obviously they made Bloodborne as well, but what I want to point out here is they took that original foundation and they kept building on it. They didn't just abandon it because they didn't know what to do and they wanted to bring in a newer viewership to the actual FromSoftware type of games. And I have to respect them for that, because if you look at it from this kind of standpoint, look at Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy used to be a turn-based game, and it was a very successful turn-based game. If you look at the Metacritic scores on all those old Final Fantasy games, they did extremely well. But when you look at something like the previous ones, I do feel like they have lowered the quality of the story that you like. They've lowered the quality of the features that used to be in Final Fantasy. I'm not the biggest fan of Final Fantasy 13. I actually think those are the worst games in the franchise. I feel like 15 is a step in the right direction, but it's still a long way to go from what they used to be. Now, then I look at something like Persona. Persona reviewed very well. It's very beloved. It kept that original turn-based strategy type of game, and it really made sure that it was doing something different. I feel like Square could have done something like that, but instead of doing that, they went the other way. They're like, let's change it up and see if we can get people in instead of building on the foundation that we currently have to bring in new people to the franchise. Look at FromSoftware. They've took certain elements from every game they've ever made, and they've crafted all of these pieces like they get a Lego from every single game they make. And when they made Elden Ring and they were designing that game, they're like, okay, this isn't what worked this game. This isn't what worked that game. This worked this game, but it didn't work that game. Let's get rid of this and keep that. And all of it was because of previous games that they was able to hone in and make something like Elden Ring. And they also made it to an open world, which is something that they did, I think, very well. Now, look at Final Fantasy. They went from Final Fantasy 10 to 12, where they kind of went away from the turn-based, but it was still there a little bit. Then they went to 13, where they brought it back a little bit, but they took away certain elements elements that was in the Final Fantasy franchise, like being able to really go through your characters, being able to travel really good. Like, I feel like in 13 there wasn't a lot of traveling things. It's like you listen to the main story, and by the time you could travel, the game was pretty much taken care of. It was over. And 15 was a little bit better because you could make those travel movements, but you didn't really have any choice on characters. And I didn't really feel like none of the characters from Final Fantasy 15 was amazing in itself either. I just feel like Square has shown that they don't know what they're doing most of the time with that brand. And you could see it kind of because instead of making newer games, they keep delaying 16. I haven't really heard anything about 16, but they do push out 7 Remake. They're talking about a leak that was made for Final Fantasy 9 Remake. So it's like, to me, if you're already going back and you're remaking these older games, and sure, the fans harassed them to make these older games, so I can understand why they would bring them out, but it just seems like they're really focusing on the older games and not necessarily the newer games. Now, I will say that in terms of action-paced, I think Final Fantasy VII is the best we're going to get, where they give you that little strategic mode and they have that action-based. It's a little bit of a decent middle ground, but it's never going to be that old Final Fantasy that I loved when I was younger. Now, are they ever going to go back to that? Probably not. They did have some success with Final Fantasy VII, and people still like the newer direction. Maybe not myself, but people do still like the newer direction. And that's why I always preach, when these developers make a sequel to a game or make another game around the same foundation as the game that their fans love, make sure you fans are good. When they making another Final Fantasy, I felt like it was a kind of a slap in the face how they drastically changed the gameplay the way they did. Now, there are exceptions that I feel like some other developers have done and changed the actual formula drastically that worked out well for them. I'm a huge fan of Assassin's Creed, and I don't really like the newer formats. Now, I'm not saying they're bad. I think they're okay games. I just don't feel like they're Assassin's Creed games. I like the older Assassin's Creeds, and when they changed the formula up again, I got really frustrated because I didn't really want an RPG playing Assassin's Creed. I wanted that narrative-focused assassin type of game from the Assassin's Creed games. But that did work out for them because I feel like they had to do something like that to really broaden the amount of people that's going to come in and play Assassin's Creed. But when it comes to Final Fantasy, I feel like the Metacritic of the older ones, comparing it to the new ones, probably except Final Fantasy VII Remake, because that does capitalize on a lot of nostalgia moments. It speaks for itself. I mean, I feel like the older Final Fantasies, they were in the 90s, a lot of them were. Final Fantasy 9, Final Fantasy 10, Final Fantasy 8, maybe not 8, I'm not looking at them directly. 7 definitely was, but when you look at 13, it's like an 80 something. Final Fantasy 15 is like an 80 something, and I think that shows the downgrade in quality, not necessarily on what the presentation that they're giving us. It's the different type of games that they're giving us and presenting to us, because that is not the type of game that Final Fantasy fans enjoy and love. Now, clearly, we got to see Final Fantasy 16. Hopefully, they'll be able to take what they've learned from making 7 and apply that to 16 to make a lot of people happy. But going back to the original point of the video, what I see when I play Elden Ring is I see a company that nurtured that brand as best as they could. I see a company that took some things that worked and some things that didn't, and they kept applying it through game to game, and they really built that foundation that the Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro love. And I see a company that knows what their fans want, and they know what their brand wants. And the only thing I really regret is the fact that Square Enix didn't try this, because I feel like if they would have done something, probably go a little bit more into the gameplay of the older Final Fantasies, maybe they could have even had something better than Persona, because that is a company that definitely stuck to its roots, and they've went of a long way since then. Look at Dragon Quest, same thing. They do have different ways you can play that game, but you can play that the old-fashioned ways. But anyway, tell me what you guys think in the comment section below. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of you feel like Final Fantasy's in a good spot, but to me, it's not been in a good spot for years. It's been okay after okay games. It's never been great games, besides maybe Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I think we can all agree that a lot of that has to do with nostalgia, not necessarily the actual product that they presented to us back then when that game came out. But, you know, tell me in the comment section below, do you agree with me that that you feel like Elden Ring shows that a company, any company, as long as they continue building on the foundation that that game is built on, for instance, the FromSoftware's formula, you guys know how they love doing games, and they kept building on that over and over again. Do you think that that shows that some studios aren't really trying to hone in on their skill, they're just trying to do something new? Or do you feel like everything needs to change eventually, and you always need to bring in new people regardless what you do and how you feel about the old fan base? But anyway, put that in the comment section below, and until next time, this is Gaming Addict. I'm out of here. Peace.